Okay, so this is the levels of explanation view versus the integration view on the issue of homosexuality. So I'll let you guys, we'll let Myers' levels of explanation view go first. Is that okay? You guys, since we've had them around the longest.
That's fine. Their chapter comes before mine anyway.
Yeah. Film's running. Who's first? Let's have everybody have it. Each side gets a chance to do a presenting
Statement.
presenting your argument at just basically where you stand.
Nice.
And out of 4 people, they ought to be able to come up with that. You could tell they worked on this all weekend, probably.
Just trying to gather my thoughts.
Not that there isn't more.
Had a
so-
late start this morning. I did.
I know you did.
I didn't want to read this morning. Good question. Turn around.
Somebody ought to stand up and at least tell a joke or something. Come on. This is dead air. You never do this. I'll pause it.
Yeah, one of you. You got this, Madison.
All right.
Okay. So, according to the levels of perspective, parental factors and psychological influence, they don't really, there's no known parental or psychological influence on sexual orientation. So, you know, whether it's the parents are gay or or they in just a homosexual environment, it doesn't really influence the kids. Nor does sexual behavior or moral behaviors influence sexual orientation, as well as an active faith. So individuals that do go to church compared to individuals that don't go to church, there's no known influence on them as to sexual orientation. But when compared to like alcohol abuse or drug abuse, you know, obviously the ones that are in church are not as influenced in that area. Let's see. And even in today's environment, when there is more tolerance of and more presence of homosexuality and it's more widely accepted, that doesn't seem to influence. There hasn't been a significant increase in that area of homosexuals as well. And then the biological factors are looking more important. You know, although we've done the levels of explanation view has done centuries of research, you know, it does appear that genetic factors do kind of influence sexual orientation. And then from a biblical standpoint, the Bible doesn't have a lot to say specifically about sexual orientation. It just kind of vaguely addresses it, and it's not really specifically from Jesus. So that's what the levels of explanation view says.
Integration.
Okay, the integration view says that it is our Christian responsibility to live out the lordship of Christ over all of existence by giving His special revelation, God's true word, its appropriate place of authority, and determining our fundamental beliefs about and practices towards all of reality. And this includes sexuality and homosexuality. Our capacity to do science is one of God's gifts to us, but while God has revealed in Scripture, while God has revealed in Scripture the great truths essential to life, He has not chosen to reveal everything that is good and useful to know in Scripture alone, but He has instead made us rational beings in His image, capable of pursuing and discovering truth as we engage the world. So integration says that both Christianity and psychology are intertwined. Christianity includes assertions of fact, and science always involves matters of theology. To combat what Myers was saying, the Christian scriptures present a positive and cohesive portrait of our sexuality, and I'll get into that as we go on later. You want me to present his view now, or let them go again?
No, you can go ahead and do the main view, and then we can argue about it.
Okay. The first point, our physical bodies are good. God made us as physical beings. We do not just have bodies, we are bodies, though we are more than just bodies. God made us sexual beings, male and female, and our sexuality is good. Genesis 1 and 2 depicts God creating two types of human beings, male and female, both made in the image of God and both declared to be very good. We are made for relationship. In Genesis 2:15 through 24, we learn that even the perfect man is insufficient by himself, even in the perfect environment and in the perfect relationship with God himself. God declares that it is not good that the man be alone. Human beings are made for a relationship with a complementary version of human being, a man for a woman and a woman for a man. Humans are created capable of becoming one flesh through the joining of their bodies, and the resulting capacity for reproduction in marriage is blessed by God and a blessing from God. Humanity rebelled against God and in the process broke God's beautiful gift of sexuality, along with all of his other gifts to us. As a result, we are rebellious, broken, twisted. God is at work redeeming our sexuality in two crucial ways. God has revealed his standards or rules for how we are to conduct our sexual lives, and his laws are for our own good. God has also offered us a living relationship with him through the death and resurrection of his Son, Jesus Christ, so that we are actually capable of living our lives in a way that gives him pleasure and moves us towards the blessedness he intended for us. The scriptures reveal that sexual intercourse has a meaning fixed and determined by God. It creates a one-flesh union between a man and a woman, a union that is to knit them together in a way that's supposed to remain permanent through life.
Let's say you get a rebuttal time now. How do you go up and respond to his statements? Or to the integration standpoint of homosexuality?
So in response to the integration view, what Jones perhaps overstates is the extent to which scriptural truths are as stable and enduring, or more so, than any empirical generalization. Scriptural teachings such as that we are both physical and spiritual soulless beings are absolutely trustworthy truths about human conditions. But does that fail to appreciate the extent to which biblical interpretations is a human activity that has changed over time? Yesterday's biblical truths about race and gender and sexual orientation, or about what it meant to be stewards of the creation, have all been revisited by more recent biblical scholarship. Mindful of our human fallibility, even interpreting Scripture, Jones advises models humility that can ensure that we are not pressing God's words to say things that it does not say. And this is good advice, but because historically there are many examples of people cherry-picking and interpreting the Bible in ways that make it say what they believe, thus justifying their own beliefs. So there we have the beliefs guide perception and self-serving bias. And then finally, he approaches this topic believing that the Bible and Christian tradition are normative and foundational for my understanding of human sexuality, but also that science can provide much useful information about human sexuality. So far we have no argument. Our debate is joined at two levels, biblical and scientific. And then, lastly, I would only note that serious biblical scholars, including some associated with evangelical traditions, are wrestling with different understandings. There's a conservative side, and then there's the more progressive side. So there's no united front. They're not together on how they define it. So that's what I have to say about that.
Another thing that Myers adds about Jones, he says that the Bible has little, if anything, to say about an enduring sexual orientation, meaning that out of the 31,103 verses in the Protestant Bible, only 7 frequently quoted verses, none of which are Jesus' words, speak directly of same-sex behavior, but it's mostly about like adultery, temple prostitution, adultery, child exploitation, or violence. And so to say that, like, I don't know, I guess the Bible has a lot to say of sexual orientation. This goes, I guess, against what Jones said, because he's only speaking of how God created us and not of the actual sexual orientation of a person.
Josh. You guys are ganging up on Josh,
I can take it.
but that's okay. I'm sure he's going to rise to the challenge here.
Huh?
That's right.
No.
No, she should have moved her chair over because that looked like he just got backstabbed by somebody.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's all right. It happens. To pick up where I left off, the scriptures reveal to us that sexual intercourse has a meaning fixed and determined by God. So to review, humans are capable of becoming one flesh through the joining of their bodies, and the resulting capacity for reproduction in marriage is blessed by God and a blessing from God. He created man and woman for this reason. It creates a one-flesh union between a man and a woman, a union that is to knit them together in a way that's supposed to remain permanent through life. This is the teaching that is foundation for Jesus' condemnation of divorce in Matthew 19 and Paul's condemnation of sexual immorality in 1 Corinthians 6. So Jesus does talk about condemning divorce and banning basically the union that has been made between man and woman. Many well-meaning people reason something like this. The Bible condemns homosexuality, but science has proven that homosexuality is genetic. Something that is genetic is not voluntary, and if it's not voluntary, it can't be a sin. Therefore, the Bible and the traditional Christian sexual ethic are simply wrong. This argument is wrong logically and scientifically. It's wrong logically because the Bible does not condemn homosexuality, but condemns homosexual acts. Those acts are voluntary, and Christian theology has never made voluntariness a condition of sin. All of us are sinful and prone to sin as part of our basic condition and natures. We cannot choose otherwise. We cannot choose not to be sinful. It's not the homosexuality that Jesus is talking about. It's the decision and the choice to act upon those desires. Myers suggests that his engagement with science has led him to reform his moral views about sexual orientation, but he offers no compelling scientific evidence for his moral acceptance of homosexual conduct. First, he asserts that there is no known parental or psychological influence on sexual orientation. To start with, note that Christian belief does not demand psychological causation of homosexual orientation over biological causation, and Myers never informs us why this psychological causation issue is of any moral or theological consequence. Christian belief centers on the biblical teaching that homosexual conduct is immoral, hence that the condition of desiring homosexual intimacy is somehow a distortion of God's intent for human life. In claiming that there is no known parental or psychological influence on sexual orientation, Myers ignores numerous studies that indicate some contribution of family and environment to the development of homosexual orientation. Recently, 2 enormous and sophisticated studies involving tens of thousands of subjects have suggested that familial socialization and familial instability make statistically significant contributions to the development of same-sex attraction. Myers then makes a second problematic assertion, that biological factors are looking more and more important, specifically that biological siblings of gay people, especially their identical twins, are somewhat more likely than people without gay relatives to themselves be gay. I have argued consistently that we Christian researchers should be open to the contribution of biological variables to the development of a homosexual condition. Even so, the magnitude of biological contribution is regularly exaggerated. In fact, the best identical twin evidence shows no significant genetic contribution. I provide evidence in the integration chapter that both the biological causation and impossibility of change arguments are unsupported by the best science. So, in at least these 3 areas, Myers claims to be responding to the best science, but offers nothing compelling from science itself. The public believes homosexual orientation is genetic, but is it? Many studies have claimed to validate this conclusion, but we have reviewed this evidence and shown that the actual results are much more inconclusive than many imagine.
Okay, so to kind of go off of, go against what he said, because he's talking more about the Christian side of things and what Jesus proposes we do. It says, Myers goes on to say that sexual orientation appears to be unaffected by an active faith, meaning that, okay, that if they do have an active faith, their sexual orientation is not because whether they are straight or gay, and that doesn't play a role in if they believe in Jesus or not. And then going on the biological factors, although this is kind of like a story that's still being written, because it's been a big argument over the last decade or so. There is evidence that points to both prenatal influences into brain differences in the region known to influence sexual behavior. So this is talking about the twin study. And so if they have, if their sibling is gay, then this kind of influences that. Sexual orientation is a natural disposition, not a voluntary moral choice. And that's part of the biological factors. And it says that people who have experimented with homosexual behavior, as many heterosexual people do, continue for it. Homosexuals, like heterosexuals, can become celibate, or if they marry against what they truly, say if he's a guy and marries a woman. And one of the things that they've researched is that on efforts to try to help people do a 180 reversal of their sexual orientations, their feelings, and their fantasies, reveals that though they have tried, hoping to escape their culture's contempt, few have succeeded. So they question, can therapy change sexual orientation? And it's said to no, it is not changeable. There are antidotes of ex-gays, but these are offset by antecedents of ex-gays, often the same people a few years later.
Yeah, we have. Okay, let's see. To suggest that sexual orientation may be disposed rather than chosen leaves moral issues open. Shall we regard homosexuality as like left-handedness, a natural part of human diversity, or as a lamentable aberration such as dyslexia? Moreover, whether straight or gay, everyone faces moral choices over options that include abstinence, promiscuity, and permanent commitment. It therefore behooves us that all concerned to biblical mandates and priorities critically evaluate and learn from natural revelations of science, regard one another with love and grace, and learn from one another through open, honest dialogue. So we see, the same things are happening, whether it doesn't matter if they're gay or if they're straight individuals. They still have the choice of abstinence or to go sleep with a woman. If the other individuals make the choice to sleep with a man, the choices are still there, and there can still be, a solid home if the individuals are, homosexuals. There could still be a positive environment. That doesn't really change anything. And then, let's see, psychological science in Levin's ancient biblical wisdom about human nature. Psychological science documents the corrosion of family values and the toxic effects of that corrosion for children and civic life. Psychological science has shown the correlates between an active faith in human health and happiness. And psychological science challenge us to revisit assumptions, mindful that all truth is God's truth, and therefore truth is to be welcomed rather than feared. This is not to say that psychological science value-laden is limited, as it is. It should be ever the final word.
So, Josh, you get one more chance here. If you want to rebut, if you want to.
I would like to. Well, this debate was about the view on homosexuality and what integration says versus the levels of explanation. It's not about how we are supposed to treat homosexuals or how they are treated in society, but how we should view it, where our beliefs about homosexuality should come from. Again, the cognitive content, the truth assertions of our faith, particularly the teachings of Scripture, should structure our beliefs, not what society has come to be. It is often argued that science has proven sexual orientation change is impossible, but this is an empty assertion because it is impossible to conceive of a definitive study that could ever prove that change is possible, since there is no biological gene that we can observe in the human body, then we can't observe if that gene has been changed over time or what. Any number of anecdotes or studies showing that change did not happen for one or several persons can never add up to proving that change is impossible. As a logical parallel, centuries of anecdotal and even scientific evidence that human heart transplant was impossible did not, in the end, mean that it was actually impossible. Second, considerable scientific evidence exists that sexual orientation change sometimes occurs. Jones and Yarhouse summarized scattered evidence studied over decades, reporting that change occurs for some through psychotherapy and through religious interventions. Criticisms that these studies were inconclusive or methodologically inferior mean that such claims must be interpreted cautiously, not that change is impossible. New studies in manifesting improved rigorous studies suggest that change in orientation sometimes does occur. A new and respected study following a group of female non-heterosexuals over a decade found a dramatic change in some, including lesbians, becoming heterosexual. Our own longitudinal study, Jones and Yarhouse in 2007 and 2009, of 98 homosexuals seeking a change in their sexual orientation through involvement in a group of Exodus International Christian Ministries, found that 3 years after beginning the change process, roughly 1/3 of the remaining sample either reported successful change by becoming heterosexual or by becoming chaste. The findings of the outcomes at 6 years were even slightly more positive. Of 61 cases still in the study at the 6-year mark, 53% reported some version of success, either having experienced what they regarded as a full conversion to heterosexuality or as a successful adjustment to chastity. In conclusion, I would argue that this essay by Myers helps to establish the validity of the integration approach and undermines his own levels approach. By admitting that belief guides perception, Myers legitimates the consistent Christian bringing his or her biblical understandings to the work on psychological science and practice. Moreover, Myers' analysis of sexual orientation serves as a case study to demonstrate that even the person who is committed to objectively following the findings of science, wherever they may lead, still engages science through the grid of assumptions and commitments that they bring into their work. In this case, the problem is not that Myers is allowing his theological and moral assumptions to ground his scientific understandings. He clearly is, but rather that Myers' moral understandings are at variance with the clear and consistent teaching of Scripture on the morality of homosexuality conduct.
Everybody, give yourselves a hand. Now, let me shut this off.